The world doesn't tell you how loud silence can be until you're the last one standing in it. Or maybe I should say the last two. Waves kept crashing against the jagged rocks like applause for a tragedy no one wanted to watch, and all I could think was, why him? Why me? Why us of all the souls lost out there? Ethan stirred behind me, his forehead pressing into the base of my neck, his breathing shallow but steady. It wasn't supposed to be him. We weren't supposed to end up like this, stranded, broken, clinging to each other like lifelines. He was the golden boy from Boston, the one who never looked twice at me except with that cutting edge of sarcasm. And yet, here he was, shivering against my back as if the warmth of my body was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. The wreck had stolen everything. Our families, our friends, even our names felt like they were dissolving into the ocean mist. But it left us with something else too, something I wasn't ready to name yet. The beach stretched out endlessly, scattered with debris of lives that would never return. A suitcase here, a torn shirt there, the shadow of a lifeboat overturned and useless. I wanted to scream, to curse the unfairness of it all. But Ethan's trembling fingers gripped the hem of my shirt as though even my anger might abandon him. "You should try to sleep," I murmured, my voice hoarse, tasting of salt and smoke. "Not if you're awake," he whispered back, almost too soft to hear. I closed my eyes. It wasn't an answer, not really. It was a plea. Back home in New York, I had always been the quiet one, the boy who kept to himself. Ethan was everything I wasn't: loud, radiant, magnetic. People fell for him the way moths surrendered to fire, and I, always watching from the edges, thought he'd never notice someone like me. But now, stripped of the world's noise and expectations, I realized he saw me in a way no one else ever had. And it terrified me. The first night was the worst. The cold cut through our wet clothes, the sand beneath us unforgiving. Ethan pressed closer, his body trembling against mine. I told myself it was survival, nothing more, that the weight of his head on my shoulder wasn't comfort but necessity. But when his breath ghosted against my collarbone, when his fingers slipped into mine in his sleep, I knew I was lying. Morning came with no mercy. The sun rose too bright, too cruel, exposing every wound, every bruise. We scavenged what we could from the wreckage. Half a bottle of water, a cracked lighter that sputtered more than it sparked, and 2 apples bruised beyond recognition. It was pitiful. We were pitiful. And yet, when Ethan looked at me with those desperate eyes, like I was the only certainty left in his collapsing universe, I felt something stronger than despair. I felt a reason to keep breathing. "Do you think anyone's coming?" he asked on the second day, his voice raw from thirst. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to give him hope. But the horizon was empty, the sea endless, and lies wouldn't save us. "I don't know," I admitted. He nodded slowly, eyes cast downward. "Then it's just us." The way he said it, half fear, half something else, sent a shiver through me. Just us, alone against the world. Nights blurred into days. Hunger gnawed at us. Thirst haunted every thought. But worse than the physical pain was the way silence opened doors we had kept locked for years. Memories, regrets, confessions. They slipped out in fragments as the tide whispered at our feet. One evening, as the sky bled into twilight, Ethan asked, "Do you think they knew? About you?" The question hit harder than the storm had. My chest tightened. I had never said the words aloud, never dared to give them air. But here, in the wreckage of everything, what was there left to hide? "No," I whispered. "I never let them." His hand found mine again, not tentative this time but steady, deliberate. "Maybe that's why you survived. Maybe you were meant to." I almost laughed. "Meant to do what? Die slower?" "No," he said, looking straight into me. "Meant to live. With me." The ocean roared around us, but all I heard was his voice. Hope is a dangerous thing. It slips in when you least expect it, fragile but unstoppable. As the days stretched on, Ethan's presence became less of a burden and more of a compass. He was infuriating, stubborn, reckless, but he was also light in the darkness. And I hated how much I needed him. Because need meant weakness, and weakness out here meant death. But every time he leaned against me, every time his laughter cracked the silence, I thought, maybe weakness isn't the worst thing to carry. The storm hit on the 5th night. Lightning split the sky, rain drowning everything in its path. We clung to each other, to the fragments of wreckage we had turned into shelter. Ethan's arms wrapped around me like a vow. "If we die," he shouted over the wind, "promise me you'll tell the truth." "What truth?" I yelled back, choking on salt water and fear. "That you loved me." The words struck harder than the storm itself. My breath caught, my chest a battlefield of denial and desperate longing. And before I could stop myself, I screamed back, "I already do." The world didn't end that night, but something in me did. Something else began. The morning after the storm felt like waking up inside the ruins of a cathedral. Everything was wreckage, the sky pale and stripped bare, the air heavy with salt and smoke. The ocean was calmer now, rolling in with an almost mocking serenity, as if it hadn't tried to devour us just hours before. Ethan stirred first. His hair, usually perfect even when messy, was plastered against his forehead, tangled with sand and seaweed. He sat up slowly, rubbing his arms, and then his gaze landed on me. There was no trace of sarcasm in his face anymore, only exhaustion, and a strange softness that scared me more than any wave ever could. "You meant it, didn't you?" His voice was husky, as if the words had been burning in his throat all night. I wanted to pretend I didn't know what he meant. I wanted to brush it off, make a joke, anything to lighten the weight pressing down on us. But we had no masks left, no excuses, not here. "Yes," I said simply. The word felt like both surrender and salvation. Ethan let out a shaky laugh, his eyes glistening. He shook his head like he couldn't believe it, then leaned closer. "You know, I've spent years convincing myself that you hated me, that the way you looked at me was just disgust." I swallowed hard. "And what if it wasn't? Then I would have been the biggest fool for not seeing it sooner." We didn't kiss then. The moment hung in the air, fragile and trembling, but neither of us moved. It wasn't because we didn't want to. It was because the world had already taken so much from us, and somehow this, whatever it was, felt too sacred to risk rushing. So instead, we worked. We searched the shoreline, gathering anything the ocean hadn't swallowed. A half-torn tarp became a roof. Driftwood turned into a fire that smoked but still burned. The bruised apples were long gone, but Ethan found a jar of peanut butter cracked open yet still edible. We laughed like children when we discovered it, scooping it out with our fingers, sticky and ridiculous. For a moment, we weren't survivors. We were just boys. The nights were still hard. Hunger and cold gnawed at us, shadows whispering doubts we didn't dare voice. But every time I felt like giving in, Ethan would lean against me, his warmth radiating through the dark, and I remembered that I wasn't alone. "Tell me something," he murmured one night, his voice almost lost under the roar of the tide. "Like what?" "Anything. Something you've never told anyone." I hesitated. The words clung to my throat like broken glass, but I forced them out. I used to dream about running away, just disappearing, leaving the noise, the expectations, the lies, starting somewhere no one knew me. "And did you ever?" "No. I was too afraid." Ethan's hand found mine beneath the makeshift blanket of tarp. He squeezed once, firmly. "You're not afraid now." I laughed bitterly. "I'm terrified. That's different. Terrified means you still care enough to live. On the 7th day, we saw the ship. It was just a speck at first, a shadow on the horizon. My heart stopped, then raced so fast I thought it might burst. Ethan shot to his feet, waving his arms, shouting until his voice broke. "They won't see us," I said, panic clawing at my chest. "They will," he shouted back, defiance blazing in his eyes. "They have to." We tore through the wreckage, lighting branches, sending smoke signals into the endless sky. For hours we burned everything we could, every scrap of wood, every shred of cloth. The ship moved closer, then farther, then closer again. It was torture, watching hope rise and fall with each wave. When night fell, the ship was gone. Ethan collapsed beside me, his chest heaving, his face streaked with tears he refused to wipe away. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him we'd be fine. But the words stuck, because for the first time I wasn't sure I believed them. So instead, I wrapped my arm around his shoulders and held him as tightly as I could. The days blurred together again. Our food dwindled, our bodies weakened, but something else grew stronger. A bond, unspoken but undeniable. Every glance lingered longer, every touch burned deeper. One afternoon, while the sun scorched overhead, Ethan finally broke the silence. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked, staring at the horizon. "What?" "I'm not afraid of dying anymore. I'm afraid of dying without telling you everything." I turned to him, my throat dry. "Then tell me." His eyes met mine, fierce and unyielding. "I've loved you since the first time you rolled your eyes at me in chemistry class. I thought it was hate, I really did, but I couldn't stop watching you. And when I saw you drowning out there, when I thought I'd lost you, I realized it would have been the end of me too." The world seemed to fall silent. Even the waves paused, listening. My chest tightened, my pulse thundered. And then I kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't perfect. It was desperate, messy. A collision of fear and hunger and years of unspoken longing. But it was real. More real than anything I'd ever felt. When we broke apart, breathless and shaking, Ethan pressed his forehead to mine. "We're screwed, aren't we? Completely?" I whispered, smiling through tears. And then we laughed, because sometimes laughter is the only weapon you have left. But the ocean wasn't done testing us. On the 10th day, Ethan collapsed. His body had grown weaker, his lips cracked from thirst. No matter how I tried to shake him, to force him to drink the little water we had, his eyes fluttered shut. Panic ripped through me, raw and violent. "No, no, no," I begged, cradling him in my arms. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to leave me here alone." His hand twitched weakly against mine. "Stay," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." My voice broke. "Do you hear me? You're not leaving me." I held him through the night, rocking him as if my arms alone could anchor him to life. And when dawn broke, when his eyes finally opened again, relief crashed over me so hard I sobbed into his chest. "See," he murmured weakly, his hand brushing through my hair. "You're stronger than you think." I pulled back just enough to look at him, my tears staining his skin. "No, I'm only strong because of you." That day, for the first time, I believed we might make it. Not because the ocean had spared us, but because somehow, against every odd, we had found each other in the wreckage. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to survive. The 11th day bled into the 12th like a fever dream. Hunger had become a constant drumbeat in my skull, thirst a knife carving its way through my throat. And yet, Ethan, weak as he was, still managed to smile at me whenever our eyes met. That smile was a rebellion, a refusal to let despair win. But I could see it, the way his ribs showed sharper every morning, the way his hands shook when he tried to lift driftwood for the fire. I tried to hide my fear, but he knew. Of course he knew. "You can't keep looking at me like I'm about to disappear," he whispered one evening, his head resting against my chest. I swallowed hard. "What if you do? Then I'll haunt you," he said, his lips curving into a crooked grin. "And you'll never get rid of me." I wanted to laugh, but the lump in my throat was too heavy. Instead, I pressed a kiss to his hair, tasting salt and smoke. "I'd take that deal." On the 13th day, we found the river. It was small, hidden behind a stretch of trees that looked more like bones than branches, but the water was fresh, cold, alive. We fell to our knees, drinking until our bellies hurt, splashing our faces, gasping with relief. For the first time since the wreck, hope didn't feel like a cruel trick. Ethan cupped water in his hands, letting it drip down my face as if baptizing me back into the world. "See? We're not cursed. Not yet. Don't jinx it," I warned, but I couldn't stop smiling. We filled 2 battered bottles and carried them back to our makeshift camp. The fire burned brighter that night, and so did we. But survival wasn't enough. The emptiness inside us demanded more. Food, strength, the future. On the 15th day, I decided to risk the inland. Ethan tried to argue, of course. "You can't just wander into the woods alone. What if you don't come back? Then you'll haunt me, remember?" I teased weakly. "Not funny. I'll be careful. I promise." He stared at me for a long time, then sighed and pressed his forehead against mine. "If you're not back by sundown, I'm coming after you. Deal." I kissed him once before leaving, quick and fierce, as if sealing the vow between us. The woods were quieter than the ocean, but no less threatening. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a predator. My heart pounded as I pushed deeper, searching for anything edible. Berries, roots, even insects. I thought about Ethan with every step, his fragile body curled up under the tarp, waiting, depending on me. Hours passed before I found a small cluster of fruit. I didn't know the name, but hunger screamed louder than caution. I tasted one cautiously, sweet, tangy, safe enough. Relief nearly buckled my knees. I gathered as much as I could, cradling them like treasure, and hurried back. When I broke through the tree line, Ethan was standing at the shore, scanning the horizon like a sentinel. His shoulders sagged with relief when he saw me. "You're late," he said, but his voice trembled. "Had to make it worth the wait," I replied, showing him the fruit. We devoured them like animals, juice dripping down our chins, laughing through tears. For once, we didn't feel like survivors. We felt like boys again, messy and alive. That night, lying beneath the tarp, Ethan traced circles on my palm with his finger. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "We could disappear here. Forget the world. Just stay. Build something new." The thought lodged in my chest like an ember. It was tempting, terrifying. To imagine a life where no one judged us, where no one told us what we could or couldn't be. Just us against the world. "And when they finally find us?" I asked. "Then we decide if we want to be found." His words lingered long after he fell asleep, his breath warm against my skin. The 20th day nearly broke us. A storm rolled in again, fiercer than before. Our tarp tore away, our fire drowned. The waves surged high enough to drag debris back into the sea, threatening to take us with it. Ethan clung to me, his nails digging into my arm, his body shaking with fear. "We're not going to make it," he shouted over the thunder. "Yes, we are," I shouted back, pulling him tighter. "Do you hear me? I'm not letting go." We fought the storm together, holding each other against the wind, against the water, against the terror that wanted to swallow us whole. By dawn, the beach was a wasteland, but we were still there, exhausted, broken, alive. When the sun rose, Ethan collapsed in my arms, sobbing into my chest. I kissed his tears, whispering, "We made it. We're still here." And for the first time, he kissed me back with everything he had: anger, relief, love, desperation. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was a vow. On the 24th day, salvation came. A helicopter, distant at first, a faint hum against the wind, then louder, closer. Ethan and I scrambled to our feet, waving our arms, screaming until our throats tore. "They see us," Ethan cried, tears streaming down his face. "They see us." When the helicopter descended, when ropes fell and hands reached down, it felt unreal. After weeks of silence, the roar of its blades was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. We were pulled up together, clinging to each other even as safety finally wrapped around us. The hospital in Miami was a blur of white walls and antiseptic. Doctors, nurses, flashing lights. They tried to separate us, but Ethan refused to let go of my hand. "He stays with me," he demanded, his voice hoarse but unyielding. For the first time, no one argued. Recovery wasn't easy. Our bodies were frail, our minds haunted. But every night, when the world went quiet, Ethan would curl up beside me in the hospital bed, just as he had on the beach. "You saved me," he whispered once. "No," I replied, brushing my thumb across his knuckles. "We saved each other." And it was true. We weren't just survivors of a wreck. We were survivors of silence, of fear, of the world's judgment. And we weren't done yet. Weeks later, when we finally stepped outside together, the sun felt warmer, the air lighter. People stared, whispered. Some smiled, some frowned. But none of it mattered. Because Ethan slipped his hand into mine, laced our fingers together and said, "Let them see, let them know." And I realized we hadn't just survived the ocean. We had survived ourselves. The world after rescue was louder than the ocean, louder even than the storm. Reporters with flashing cameras, doctors with endless questions, strangers who wanted our story like it belonged to them. They asked what it felt like to watch everyone else die. They asked what it was like to be alone for weeks. They asked if we thought we'd ever be the same. We never told them the truth. The truth wasn't about the shipwreck or the storms or the hunger. The truth was Ethan's hand slipping into mine in the dark, his breath on my neck when nightmares dragged him awake. The way we kissed like the world had ended and begun again just for us. That truth was ours. Back in Boston, Ethan's parents wanted him to come home. My family in New York expected the same. But after everything, home felt like a stranger's word. We stood outside the hospital one afternoon, our bodies thin but healing, our eyes still shadowed by all we had seen. Cars passed by, horns blaring, life rushing on as if nothing had changed. Ethan looked at me, his jaw set. "If we go back, we lose this. You know that, right?" I knew. Back there, we'd be the boys we were before, me, too quiet, too invisible. Him, too golden, too untouchable. Back there, people would smother us with expectations and judgment until what we'd found on that beach suffocated. So I took his hand. "Then let's not go back." We left everything behind. The hospital, the reporters, the families who didn't understand. We boarded a bus headed west with nothing but a duffel bag of donated clothes and the kind of reckless hope that only comes when you've already lost everything once. The road stretched on forever. Towns blurred past, neon diners glowing against the night, highways unwinding like veins through the heart of America. We ate greasy fries, slept curled against each other on stiff seats, and laughed at how absurdly alive we felt. Somewhere in Ohio, Ethan pressed his forehead to the bus window, watching the fields roll by. Do you ever think about them? The ones we lost. All the time, I admitted. He nodded. Me too. But maybe the best way to honor them is to live. Really live. I reached over, lacing my fingers with his. Then let's live so hard it scares people. He grinned. Deal. California welcomed us with sunlight and salt air that didn't sting like survival. We rented a tiny apartment near the ocean. Paint peeling, walls thin enough to hear our neighbors argue through. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We built a life out of secondhand furniture and part-time jobs. Ethan worked at a surf shop, his laugh filling the place like music, while I took shifts at a bookstore, finding comfort in the quiet stacks. At night, we'd meet on the balcony, legs tangled, watching the moonlight scatter across the waves. Sometimes we fought. Sometimes we broke down, the weight of memory pressing too heavy. But always we came back to each other. Because after everything, there was no one else who knew the language of our scars. One evening, months later, Ethan came home with sand still clinging to his jeans. He dropped a seashell into my palm, small and cracked but beautiful. Found it on the beach, he said, smiling. Thought it looked like us. A little broken, but still standing. I turned it over in my hand, my chest aching with love so fierce it scared me. You're ridiculous. Maybe, he admitted, brushing his lips against mine. But I'm yours. The wreck never left us. Sometimes in dreams, I still heard the screams, still felt the cold water dragging me under. Ethan would wake me, his hands steady on my chest, whispering, "You're safe. I've got you." And sometimes it was him, the nightmares pulling him back, his body trembling against mine. I'd hold him until his breathing evened, until the ghosts retreated. We carried the past like an old scar. Painful, yes, but proof that we'd survived. A year after the wreck, we went back to the ocean. Not to the same place. We could never face that shore again, but to a quiet stretch of California coast where the waves rolled gentle and forgiving. We built a fire, sat close, and let the tide brush our toes. Do you ever wonder why us? I asked, staring at the horizon. All the time, Ethan said. But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the point isn't why we survived. Maybe the point is what we do with it. And what do you want to do with it? He turned to me, his eyes steady, his voice sure. Spend the rest of it with you. The world stopped then, as if holding its breath. And I knew, whatever storms came, whatever judgment waited, we'd face it together. Years later, people still asked about the wreck. They wanted drama, tragedy, headlines. But when I told the story, I didn't talk about the sinking ship or the days without food. I talked about the boy who leaned against my back on a freezing beach, too afraid to lose me. The boy who taught me that survival wasn't just about breathing, it was about loving. Because in the end, the wreck didn't break us. It gave us everything. And when Ethan falls asleep against me even now, all these years later, his breath warm at the nape of my neck, I realize the truth we never told the reporters. We weren't the last two survivors of a tragedy. We were the first two survivors of our own beginning. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.